Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for October 2020. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs, and by sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/roguewatson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content, and we are glad to have you. Shoutouts to my Platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Basil, Tom, Huskar124, and Wizard Princess. And Gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Marcos Did Vicente, Gilberto, Shine AK, Cert 2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Arash, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Scalenia, Nick, thank you all very much for your support. This month's topic, as determined by the Patreon poll, is how to handle absent players. What happens when a player can't make a future session? Or worse, leaves us scrambling the same day by calling in? What are the different methods we like to use to make up for excused and unexcused player absences? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Corey.
Hi there.
And Jordan.
Howdy.
So this is something that has occurred to, I imagine, every DM at every point in their career. Certainly has happened to me and Chris for watching the channel's purposes. I have tackled it using, I think, all the major methods that I can think of, and this is a tricky situation because this isn't like a good problem to have. This is just straight up bad, and we're trying to make the best of it. Basically, I mean that's what it is. Like you obviously
we're finding solutions by pulling them out of our butts.
I mean, you're trying to make the best of a bad situation, and let's be clear that the reason D&D can work is because everybody can show up and have fun. But this is the real world. People can't show up for whatever reasons, and goodness knows, the older you get, the more challenging it is to try to synchronize everybody's schedules together. So, Corey, you were here first. Do you have a main go-to method if somebody can't make the session?
Well, I don't think I'm typical for the rule. Our group is pretty serious. We play twice a month, every other Sunday for 8 hours, and it's been kind of a rule. If you're going to play with us, you got to make a commitment.
Oh, all right.
And for most of the year, it works out pretty good. We take a hit some holidays, and we take a hit in the summer. But for the most part, my guys are pretty good. But for example,
this is a day-long event.
Yeah, it's like a shift of work, but we get some work done, and we get some stuff in, and but even this August, we've had it where multiple. Like I think my group has been 5 people pretty steadily since I was 18.
Oh wow!
And I'm 44 now.
That's awesome.
But we've gotten to the point where if you're not going to make it, and we're playing on Roll20, somebody else plays your character. I don't think that's typical of most groups, but in ours it is. And not the DM. I don't play any more characters. I got too much on my plate.
Yeah,
but
that's something we're going to discuss.
One of the other guys will take over, and I've been on the opposite side of that, where playing with my Sunday group, and my co-DM is DMing, and I'm not able to make it. Well, somebody plays my character.
Is it a certain person each time? Do you have like a designated driver for your character?
It kind of depends. I trust my co-DM to play my character the way he would be played, and I trust a couple of the other guys, but some of them are chaos junkies, and I wouldn't let them near my character with a 10-foot pole. But even then,
what would my character do? Not what would you do with my character?
Exactly. I've come back from a holiday and found my character dead with most of his stuff gone.
Oh no!
And it just kind of happens. But the other 2 groups I play with, I'm not the DM in either one of those. And the way he takes care of it is he actually will play the missing character, or we'll just cancel the session if enough people bail. But he doesn't do much role playing for them, but he tries to take into account their playing style, and he'll if it's the cleric, he'll throw out a healing spell every once in a while, And he's pretty fair, but I can't say I'd do it. I've got too much on my plate.
Yeah, I think I've realized that with my initial, I mean, I never had a written rule for this anywhere, like a house rule, but when we first started playing, the initial idea was that, well, the DM would then control the character. And I don't know if I quickly didn't like that or if I eventually didn't like that, but I've definitely come to not like that for the very obvious reason that you've been talking about, which is the DM has a lot going on. And frankly, I'm not paying attention to the character sheets at all. Like, if people wanted to cheat on their spell slots or anything, like, I wouldn't be paying attention to that. Like, I've got way enough going on my plate that I just assume everybody knows. I mean, obviously, if somebody does something where I'm like, wait a minute, it doesn't seem right, then I'm going to speak up about it, but I'm not really keeping track of their sheets. So whenever a player's not there and I have to look at their character sheet, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, so we're just going to let somebody else run this. Jordan, do you have a go-to method for if somebody's missing at your table?
As the DM, I'm kind of the same thing as Corey, where for me as a DM, I've kind of made it a rule at my table where I said, you let me know 3 hours in advance, otherwise we're doing strikes. Because many times, like, for me, it's, you put a lot of prep into that, you do a lot of different things. Like, if life comes up and you're willing to let me know, like, just let me know. Like, if it's an extenuating circumstance where it's like, if we're playing face-to-face and you got in a car accident, dude, we're all taking a TV timeout to make sure that you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that stuff happens, and if you're a parent and your kid's thrown up and you can't join, no harm, no foul. Let me know. And in those types of situations, obviously as a DM, you have to rebalance things. And if we want to get into that of like, how do you rebalance stuff with absent players, we can.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like if it's managing PCs from that point of view when it comes to absent players, as a player, I'll usually say, who here has played my class before? If you played a druid, take my druid. Go. We've been playing long enough, you should know how my character generally plays. But as a DM, if they haven't made those arrangements, I'm not going to push another sheet on somebody else. I'll normally look at it and go, if they're a tank, I'll kind of play them as a tank. If they're a cleric, I'll throw a couple spells. But normally, if they aren't like huge combat, kind of like how you did in Tomb, I'll pull them back and they'll be a minimal support type character, almost like how you're running your NPCs.
Yeah. Right. Like
So,
basically in the background, but if you need them to do something, then they can do something.
correct.
Or automated. Like, what does this character use? Like, the nice thing is once you've been playing for a while, you can kind of get a feel for how that player actually approaches like the average combat encounter. In terms of like, is it a trash encounter? Is it a medium encounter? Is it a tough boss fight? And you can kind of gauge like how to run them. But I would still, leave that up to the players just so that alleviates the workload from the DM and then gives the players that responsibility, basically. You mentioned something at the beginning about strikes. What did you mean by that?
What I mean by that is, like, normally I'm the type of DM where I'm very loose and goose with how many people that I'll have at the table. And with virtual tabletops, that's a little bit more difficult. And so I'll have people, like I recently had to split a group where I had 8 people, and I was like going, not all of you guys are showing up, and that makes it easier because I can count on 5 or 6 of you. But if you aren't showing up for weeks, dude, you're gone. Like, I'm not going to just carry your sheet just for the sake of by chance you might fit us in. Like, either show up and play or don't.
This is like the opposite group from what Corey was saying, where he's got the same core group forever.
Correct.
And you've got more like kind of, I don't know, is
Because
rando the right term or public games, I guess?
Yeah, because I'm kind of new to tabletops.
Yeah.
And I only just basically became a DM because people wouldn't fill the role. And I was like, I got money, I can spend it and become a DM. I like figuring out stuff. I like poking around behind the screen. So I became a DM. And I realized I really enjoyed that. And so with my players, I usually have a lot of newbie players where we haven't been playing for 10, 12 years since we're 18.
Yeah.
And so because of that, since I have a lot of fresh meat at the table, I kind of consider them as, okay, cool. Well, I would like to get a core group together. And with a lot of people that are now just getting into 5e or just tabletops in general because of the wave of new people that come in, I can understand where they may or may not like it, but I'd rather know up front. That way I'm not fitting them in at my games, because instead of playing twice a month, we'll have a regular game every Thursday. Now I'm also having a regular game every Friday. So every week we'll typically play, and if I don't have enough people to play, then we'll just go, yeah, we'll skip a week. But we have to make that as a group decision before I've put in a couple hours during the week to prep a session, to have people turn around and go, no, we can't make it, because that just sucks.
Has anyone ever handled a missing player by temporarily writing that player character out of the session? Like, you haven't shown up, therefore your character either doesn't go on the mission or disappears, or or depending on where the session is at the beginning, like something happens to where they're just not there. Like, you've effectively written them out.
Right, but I won't write them out of the story. I'll write them out of the session.
Just the session, right, correct. Yeah, just the session. Obviously, you're not, I mean, unless you need to get rid of the person for whatever reason, but I'm just talking about, like, that, the absent player thing in general, I'm not talking about, which that's a different topic. You have a problem player, that's a whole different topic, but this is just somebody that you ideally is part of the group and you want to play with, but for whatever reason, they just haven't shown up. And we'll get into excuse and unexcused stuff too, but in terms of the methods of how to handle a missing player, the two main ones that I think of, are either somebody has to run that character, or nobody runs that character, and that character is just not there for that session. Which is something that I did not do until Tomb of Annihilation, and that's when I started experimenting with that method. With mixed results.
Well, I played a campaign a long time ago. I believe it was in 3.5, and it actually had a built-in mechanic.
Really?
I don't know if you heard about it, but it's called the World's Largest Dungeon, and it was a massive tome with like poster-sized maps for each floor. But the whole idea was that it was like a supernatural prison. Once you got in, you couldn't get out, and it had I guess like a rotating portable hole.
Where
basically, if a character didn't show up, this thing would randomly come by, swallow up that character,
nice,
and hold them in stasis until the next time he showed up, and then they'd be spat out. And it actually said that and gave you a description and told you like how to introduce it and whatnot. And that was the first time, and probably the only time I've ever seen something mechanically built in that way.
Is it mechanical? Like, does anything happen to your character though, or they just literally put in stasis?
Oh yeah, it was filled with teeth, and it did damage. And okay. I believe the number of weeks you skipped, you might have come back with negative levels or something along those lines. Gosh. It's been a really long time since I played it.
That's rough.
And it honestly wasn't one of the favorite dungeons I ever or modules I ever ran with my players. But it was interesting.
I don't think I want to punish people. I mean, sometimes there are legit excuses, though. It
was a mechanic that was built into it. I don't condone it, but it was. Yeah. I just remember reading it and laughing.
If anything, it would definitely get the players to do the right behavior.
Right. So
either make a decision or don't.
Jordan, have you ever done this method where you kind of write that player character out of the session?
Yeah, but I'll do it in a variety of ways. Like, I'll have them either, hey, they need to get, like, when I was running Acquisitions Incorporated, I'll say, hey, headquarters needs them for a side-off mission, and they get pulled out, and they might come back later, or they missed something in their contract, and so they needed to go fix it. So I'll tailor it to the campaign where maybe they're off training with their mentor that was helping them level up, or they're recovering from a sickness because they don't do well with airships, so they're down in the brig while you guys are traveling. Like, I'll create some sort of story method to give them some sort of personal issue where I'll just write them out and I don't have to deal with them.
What happens if you had to leave a session in the middle of a dungeon crawl and come back.
Then I've actually done ones where I've have them captured.
Yeah.
And then dragged off by the enemy, and that part of the session they're actually trying to go free them.
So that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
I did this.
Was that with the spiders?
Well, there's 3 times. Okay, I'm trying to think of the times that I did this. I'm thinking of 3 times. One of them, right, was the spider. That was the cave going from one dungeon to another dungeon.
Yep.
And I had, I think it was 2 of them actually weren't there, and I think I captured them.
But that's slightly different because you knew that in advance. Like when
and that's something we're going to talk about too. But sometimes I have it in advance, and sometimes I don't. I've dealt with both, and that's what I mean by excused and unexcused. I don't actually literally mean like do you have a doctor's note or not. I just mean did you give the DM did you give the DM a heads up? Like did you like to where we ended a session and you said, "Hey, next week I'm not going to be able to make it," and then the DM's like, "Okay, I can prepare for that," or is it the day of the session, or even the evening, which has happened to me also, right before we go live, they say, "Hey, so-and-so is not going to make it." I'm just like, oh, shit, okay. So I have dealt with both of these methods, and yes, when I can prepare ahead of time, I can employ that method a lot more effectively because I can bake it into the story, which is how I was able to do it better on the spiders. The one I was thinking of that worked out really well, obviously spoilers for Tomb of Annihilation, was when they were in the middle of the hedge maze outside of Dung Rung Lung,
I think you just got lucky on that one.
Yeah, I mean, half of being a DM is freaking luck. I captured Gillian, and then when the player started the next session, I got to use her as basically one of the prisoners, kind of in the middle of a little bit of a cutscene, and then very quickly it kind of motivated the players to get up there and join the fight, so it all ended up meshing together pretty well. But that was a way of just like, hey, you turned around and she was gone. The time it didn't work very well, which I think was one where I didn't get a very good heads up on, was in Omu, when I was going to do the UNT ambush in the buildings, and I had, I think I was killing again, I had her get dragged underwater or something to that effect. And the purpose of that was like, all right, I'm just going to kind of write you out of this combat encounter because it's all going to be a combat fight and that's going to be a drag. And immediately the players, I think it was Chris, was like, oh no, I dive down and rescue her. Like, I get her back in there. I was like, okay, well, I guess you're going to run our character then. So I was trying to kind of, in a bad way, write the character out, but then the players were like, no, we're going to grab them back. So like, okay. But other times I think it worked out pretty well. So I've got mixed results, and I feel like you definitely need to, if you have enough prep time, if somebody told you, ideally like the week before or at some point before, hey, I'm not going to be there, then the DM, you can prepare and say, okay, well, because we're in these kind of circumstances, I've never had it where, and just kind of the campaign we just ran, it wasn't like we were going on missions. We were just out in the jungle the entire time. So it wasn't like, this person's chilling at home and not going on this mission. Well, that wasn't going to work narratively. So it always had to be like, that you turned around, the person was gone, like they were captured. But that can work if you can prepare for it. But if you're scrambling for it, that's when I struggled.
I think one of the ways that if you do have enough time in advance, one of the things that some DMs don't always do, but it's just because maybe maybe they're running an actual like pre-written adventure and they feel like, man, I have to keep the narrative going. You don't actually need to, but people don't think of this tool, and it's running a one-shot. And I mean like an actual one-shot.
That's true. That's something we've done this several times. I didn't even think about including that in this discussion, but that is a good point. When we have a number of players that can't make it, and we know in advance that they can't make it, then there has been several times where we, obviously, canceling the session is always on the table. That's always the worst case scenario.
Right.
Which is, if the DM can't make it, obviously it's canceled. And in theory, if enough players cancel, then you're pretty much canceled. But the way we've done it is if like half the players can't make it, and we have enough of a heads up about that, then we can look at running a one-shot. And a lot of times what we'll do is if Chris is running the campaign, then I can do a one-shot, or if I'm running the campaign, then Chris can do a one-shot. That way it even offloads the amount of prep work that person is doing because they're already in the middle of their campaign. We have done that several times to pretty effect. And if you look at a lot of our one-shots, we don't have the full group that we usually run with because they were for that reason, like because we didn't have a full group.
But
It's going to be harder. Sorry, go ahead.
The example that Corey gave about doing the whole spider stuff down in Tomb of Annihilation, I consider that a one-shot. And the reason why I say that is because that's...
you mean with the same characters.
Right. It's the same characters. But what I mean is, like, one of the things that I really loved about 3.5 and 4E, even though I didn't experience it in the same way that, like, Corey did, is I can plug and play different modules or different things that were from those other editions that were modular and plug them into my pre-written 5e campaigns because those campaigns are huge.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find things where you can be like, I'm going to plug a wizard's tower in here.
DM's Guild, baby. Or Drive-Thru RPG. That's pretty much where you have to go.
Exactly. But that's what you did with the spiders, where it was like, I'm going to turn this into something bigger than it necessarily needs to be. But I'm doing it because I'm only running 2 PCs when normally I have 5.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I will look at it, instead of doing an actual legitimate one-shot where you're really doing brand new characters, brand new things, completely different, is actually just pull from a portfolio of small little modular adventures, and I'll plug them into my adventure because people still want to play, but I don't necessarily want to progress the story or the narrative because the 5e campaign has this, and maybe one of the people that is doing something, you want their backstory, but I'm going to instead do this fun little flavored murder mystery that you run into a random tavern, and I pull this from 3.5 and I plug it in there, and the people that are there are going, this is sweet. Little did they know, it has nothing to do with the actual event.
So a better example of what we did then was the session that my wife ran. Heather actually ran a session back when we were on the pirate ship going along the coast. And it was a similar situation, I believe, where about half the party couldn't make it. And
was it the mouse guard one?
Which one?
The mouse one?
Yes, it was exactly that one. Yes, where we got turned into little like mice creatures. Yes. She had just a fun idea for a little kind of one-off, and we actually hadn't done this before, where we used the same characters in the same story, and literally it was like. What's a TV show that would do it's like a clip show or something where they just kind of suspend the current story. Yeah, exactly. I mean, still, very fun and entertaining to play as. But that's kind of what you're describing, is that we use the same characters. Right. We didn't progress the narrative necessarily. Actually, we kind of did, because it was a way to get, I think it was a way to bring Prices and talk to Roka. And there was some fun teases in there that we actually did include. But otherwise, it was a kind of fun little, side jaunt. And that was something we just experimented with, and that was really fun too. But of course, on the same time, you need to have that heads up from the people who aren't going to be there, so that you have time to prep something like that.
Exactly.
I was going to say it's probably harder for you, Eric, because you've got a fan base watching you play now. I don't have anybody watching me play on Sunday, so I can show up and find out that 3 guys that were supposed to make it don't make it. And I'm playing anyway. I drove an hour to play games.
Yeah.
We're set up for 8 hours. We're playing whether there's, I've played one-on-one with a guy where he ran 5 characters before. It didn't go all that well. But like I said, I drove an hour to be at his house.
I'm playing D&D.
I'm playing D&D. Or we're going to a movie or something, but we're playing games.
That almost sounds like DM versus DM.
Oh my gosh.
Versus your 5 PCs.
Breaking a board game at that point. Yeah, that seems rough. But that method is really fun. That's something that I'd kind of almost forgotten about, because it's pretty rare, and it does take a lot of work. It's fun when we get a chance to do that. it's also fun. We get a chance to have like a guest DM come on and do it. I think that can be really enjoyable. But in general,
Generally,
if
it's not something you normally would do.
No.
But in those situations, I'll talk to my players and go, hey, this guy's gone for a couple weeks. Do you guys want to do a murder mystery? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Because narratively, we could do it at these locations, but I'm going to talk to you out of character. Which would you prefer to do? Do you want to do a gauntlet? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And they'll be like, this sounds like a lot of fun. Let's try it. And I'll narratively add things that will give them heads up of things in the story that they'll still get something out of the story. It'll be like a narrative hook where you should guys go check this out because you learned this on your one shot. But at the same point in time, they still got to play. They did something fun. And I prepped something that the other person whose backstory we might be exploring isn't missing out on.
Yeah.
And I'll pull it out of something random out of 3.5, 4E, and they'll be like, going, that was sick. Where'd you get that? I'm like going, I'm a genius DM. Like, you have no idea that I just stole that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think lucky. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think you're lucky a little bit too, Eric, because you've got two married couples that play in your group.
Yep.
Right? You and your wife and Theron and Gillian.
Yes.
And then
Raymond's also married,
so,
but his wife actually played with us one time. There's one one shot,
play.
yeah, that she was in there. That was really fun.
I don't think I saw that one.
Yeah,
that
it was from years ago,
but Theron has played Gillian a couple times, right? And
yes,
and filled in for her.
So.
And in this campaign, I don't think you've ever missed one that I've seen, but you could easily play maybe your wife's character. You know, if she was dealing with a baby or whatever, that seems to work out for you.
Oh,
for your group. Anyway.
That's true. Yeah. So, fun trivia question for everybody's watching. I'll pose this question and then I'll answer it, so you can answer in the comments or something. But have I ever missed a session of D&D that still went up on the channel?
Well, none that I've seen. I'm probably wrong.
If I had to guess and I was a betting man and I was going to bet you like a Wendy's Frosty or something.
Ooh.
Hey.
99-cent Junior Frosty.
Maybe. I'd probably say you maybe missed one and somebody like co-DM'd for you.
Well, keep in mind, here I'm probably answering the question though, but I have not always been the DM. Chris has DM'd an entire campaign.
Oh, even when you were a player?
Yeah, it's all right. I'm including, anything that's gone on the channel, and there was a whole campaign that Chris DM'd that's up on the channel that was straight.
I haven't watched all the way through that one yet.
Yeah.
I don't think they could because it needs to go up in the channel, and I don't think Heather would ever be like, "Yeah, sure, I'll run your computer."
Well, okay, so I have to further answer this. When we did that campaign, Chris actually ran it from his computer.
Oh, if that's the case,
that question,
yeah, sure.
yes.
I'd see you being like, dude, I got something I do.
So yeah, after answering all of those follow-up questions, the answer is yes, I did miss one session. I was deathly ill with the flu about 2.5 years ago, I think. It was literally coming back from one of the PAXs that we were in, PAX South in January.
PAX Play.
Yeah, it was a PAX Play, and I came back, and it was like I was like shivering, and like I was just bad flu. Which was probably the last time I was really sick, actually. And I straight up missed an entire session, which was weird, but it did happen. And I think somebody just ran my sheet, I guess. I'm not even sure how that... I'm
going to have to go back and watch that.
It was years ago at this point, yeah. I can tell you it was a session where... I don't remember the number, but it was when we were dealing with whatever Rochelle's character was, the Dragonborn, dealing with her backstory with her people and her Dragonborn people. So I don't remember what the session was, but anyway, there's some trivia for all of you if I've ever missed a session. Now, the current campaign we're doing, even though Chris is DMing, it is all from my point of view because at this point I've got so many things set up to make the production a little bit better that we just decided it was going to be easier to do it from my point of view. So yes, at this point I'm basically the producer, even though he is the current DM, so I'm not sure if I was literally bedridden if we would be able to still do D&D. We'd probably have to cancel. Anyway, so yeah, absentee. Obviously, if the DM can't make it, then that's just a no-go. I think I don't see of any, unless you all have a situation where the DM hasn't been able to make it, and I don't know, everybody else can show up and do something. It doesn't seem like.
I've had that situation happen once before, and I very much regret it. And the reason why I say that is because I didn't, unlike Corey, when you guys are co-DMing, do you guys literally like write in and write out your characters when you switch between DMs?
Well, I say co-DM. We just take turns, like Chris and Eric do. Like I've been running the campaign now for 8 months. The characters are about 9th and 10th level, and I think we'll probably go to, I don't know, for another 6 months at least. And then he's going to prep something for that afterwards, and then I'll just switch back to a player.
Yes,
gotcha. So for me, I made the very beginner DM mistake, and I would highly tell everybody never do this. But I was very new to D&D. The other people in my party were also new to D&D, and one of them was going, I want to start being a DM. I want to do my own thing. I was like, good. How's your campaign going? Everything's going well? Yeah, great. And I needed to go for work, and I needed to go on a trip. And I was like, hey, you know what? Everybody's going to be there except for me. How about you run it for me? Because you're super excited about being a DM, run it for me. I said, this is kind of the situation. I'm not going to tell you more than this. This should be enough information for the session. And I was gone, and we miscommunicated on him giving me the status update. I was like, no, that would never happen. That's crazy. That's awesome. And I was just being like, just talking with him. And he got kind of offended that, because there was a lot of 20s rolled. It was a crazy session. It sounded awesome. And I just happened to miss it. And I was just giving him a kind of a hard time. And he took it personally, what I said. And like the whole thing kind of broke down because he got offended.
Oh.
So in terms of like losing control of the session and miscommunications, like I can 100% see how being the DM and handing off the reins and then coming back, that unless you have the type of communication that you need between the other co-DM, never pass off the reins.
I mean, that's how backup quarterbacks become quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's not a control thing. It's a miscommunication thing.
Yeah.
And it kind of blew up, which was unfortunate.
That sucks.
But overall, like, I gave him enough information that it worked. It was just the miscommunication between people. So it's, yeah, like, if you're the DM and you got to go, I would just say, TV timeout, play something else, have fun.
Yeah, I mean,
do a one shot.
The other option is like Corey was saying, if you've got somebody else that DMs usually in the group, then say, hey, you want to just run a session of,
anything
of not, and what I would recommend is not this campaign, because that gets real weird,
right.
But just run it with, we'll run one shots, or, what we had for a while is we had the, I don't know what you'd call it, like our B team, where, that's where Scarlett came from, which is Heather's character in our current campaign, because she started this character when we were doing some one-shots for that reason. Like, Chris was running some one-shots, and then I ran one or two during his Storm King's Thunder campaign, and it ended up where a lot of people used the same characters, because we were kind of, they were like second level, and then third level for a while, and then maybe fourth level at one point. And that was really fun and so at some point we even had a stable of like backup characters to then jump into that situation, which helped being able to do. Now, obviously, it's still a lot of work to put together a one-shot. In fact, I would think a good one-shot is probably more difficult than any one session, because you have to do an entire like beginning, middle, and end of a story and whatever you're trying to do in that length of time. And that is a huge challenge. And that's probably goes into a whole separate topic, is how to actually run a one-shot. But it's a lot. It's fun. It's a good way of getting around, hey, we're missing players, or even missing a DM. In fact, I would have loved when Chris was gone, the reason we didn't have a D&D session or do anything, we just did a rare straight up cancellation, whenever it was 2 weeks ago, because he was on a huge, long, like 2-week vacation, and because even though the rest of us could make it, he was the DM, so he wasn't going to be there. And that would have been a good situation where I could have stepped up and said, okay, well, I'm going to DM a one-shot. I just didn't have time, unfortunately. But
Yeah, not with a 3-month-old.
yeah, that's getting pretty rough. But normally that would be the ideal situation. Like, he was able to give me like a month's heads up and say, hey, I'm going to be taking this huge vacation for this amount of time. And bless his heart, he timed it to where he was leaving Saturday so we could still do Friday session, and then came back not the next week, but the week after on like Thursday night, so we could do that other. So we'd only miss one Friday despite him being gone for like 2 weeks.
That's dedication.
It's real dedication.
Falls in between. Yep.
Exactly. Shout outs to Chris. Awesome as always. Yep. And yeah, unfortunately, I would have loved to do a one shot. It would have been a great opportunity. I'm still.
But you guys have done that like around Halloween and stuff, where you guys have said, "Hey, we don't know what you're all doing for Halloween. We're gonna do a Halloween themed this," and like you guys have done one shots where some people have been there and some people haven't, but you've done it around the holidays where it's. Yeah, those have always been fun.
Yeah, and this would probably be the first year. If I would still like to do one, I really need to start prepping that. We've enjoyed doing Halloween themed ones. I think we've done one the last, 2 or 3 years now, just because it's kind of fun to do a horror themed one. I need to get on that because it's getting to be middle of October now. So if we're doing it, we need to do it. But those are fun. That's separate from doing absent players. I think at one point we did one because we didn't have some players, but occasionally we do just a special
like
one.
When you guys did, I'm trying to remember what the thing was, but it was the mansion one, and it was where you guys did pull back Scarlet. It was just like in the last year or so. I think it was last
Halloween then, maybe. I think that was last year's.
I think so.
Yeah, that was really fun. I like that adventure a lot. And we're going to run into this problem very clearly in December because one of our married couples, Reese and Michelle, are expecting their second baby in December. And and I am very acutely aware of recently how much having a baby just screws everything up. I mean, it worked out very nicely for my family that we ended our current campaign and took a straight up month off. I still put out like review videos and stuff, but no like D&D for an entire month, which was the longest break we'd taken since we started doing D&D in whatever year it was, 5 years ago or something. And we needed that month, because that first month is just dunzo. So, and that's what they're going to go through in December. And that's when we were originally thinking, when Chris designed this campaign, he's like, all right, we're going to do a much shorter campaign. It's going to be like Fandelver sized. We're going to get through it pretty quick. And so far we have what's the word I'm looking for? He overestimated, I guess, the speed at which we could get through this content. So we're going to be running into this issue very soon in terms of having absent players with obviously very obvious excused absences. But still, that's something we're going to have to work with.
But at the same point in time, that kind of leans into something both you and Corey can speak about, where having that time off isn't necessarily a bad thing. It makes you miss it more, but you need it.
Yeah, for sure. And we usually take, I think, a week or two off for the holidays. It kind of depends on when the holidays fall, but and I think holidays is rough for everybody in general in terms of your usual. That's why we all bemoan the holidays for we like them and hate them. But it screws up your usual schedule, and that's part of what D&D is. And yes, partly as somebody who puts on a show and tries to do it every week, and I'm very acutely aware of a big tenet to being successful when doing these kind of shows is consistency. You really need to have a consistent schedule and, consistent production with the output level. And, the second we start getting wishy-washy with, and at some point I think it was like that. Like we had a session, I don't know if this was in Storm King's days or what it was, where it was like, the folks would say, oh, we can't make it on this day. And then we'd say, okay, well, let's try and do it this. I think it must have been a time when we were recording and not actually streaming our sessions, because we were doing that at some point. I think for Prince's.
Was that in Fandelver?
I think so, yeah. I think we tried to start streaming at one point, and then we just went to recording, and then we didn't live stream until, I think, Storm Kings, yeah. So it must have been the Fandelver Prince's days. And we were trying to do makeup sessions. Like we would constantly shuffle days around, and it was just kind of a nightmare. And then when I started Tomb, I was like, it's Friday or bust. Like I'm not switching the days around. Like I'm putting my foot down in terms of we are going to be going live every Friday night at this time. And obviously, of course, the time was a joke because we usually have to wait, 15 minutes for people to show up. I mean, that's I'm very acutely aware of this. But we didn't change the days around. We stayed on that time and that caused for folks to not be able to make it occasionally or be late or something. But we were still able to do it. So ultimately, I think that was the right call. So I prefer having it certainly one day and being able to stick to it. But that does, some people can't make it sometimes, and I think the player controlled missing player is probably the best go-to method, especially when you don't have a good heads up, which does happen. Ideally, the person has told you, right before something and given you some excuse that for whatever reason it's like, okay, I just didn't know until now that I'm not going to be able to make it, and then it leaves you scrambling. In terms of rebalancing, I don't think I've ever specifically done that because the balance in D&D is just weird to begin with, and I feel like it's
been weird for a long time.
I feel like
it's very hard to balance.
I feel like the best way to balance, regardless in any situation, is just to do it live during the combat in session and not try to overanalyze the prep and say, oh, do I need to add another dude in here or not? Just wait till the combat happens, and then are they kicking ass? Add some more dudes. Are they suffering? Maybe this attack kills that guy. It's easier to do it to make those adjustments during the battle, and that doesn't really change with the number of players. It just means that you're more acutely aware of, I guess, what the players can handle. But if a player is controlling another player character, they technically still have that person. They're just maybe not optimized in terms of what the character can do.
Forget which abilities they've got and forget what they normally do. And I didn't take my bonus action this round. Yeah,
and that's something that helps with the more that you've played together, especially with the same group and the same characters, you get a feel for how that character plays. But at the same time, I'm mainly worried about the campaign we're in now, where our characters are so complicated and we've never played this high of level. Speaking of which, I need to level my character up. God, it's Thursday. Whoops.
Gosh.
But
after this stream.
Yeah, exactly. I'll be hurriedly getting on Roll20.
When you're not prepping as a DM.
Yeah, I'm just like, man. I mean, life's just nuts right
Friday.
now.
It's coming.
Yep, it's coming. I don't know how many times that I was like, I'd walk by my wife on Friday and be like, hey, did you level your character? And she'd be like, oh, shit. Just immediately open up Roll20. But that's something I'm worried about because our characters are so complicated that I wouldn't even know how to begin trying to run each other's sheets now with all the things that characters can do. So that's something that's easier to do, in the lower levels when a character just, extra attack, or, cast a spell or something. But once you get into these teens, like, holy crap, players are capable of so many things. It gets daunting for not even a DM, but even just another player to try to play it.
Well, I hate to say it, but I've had entire campaigns derail or TPK when somebody else is playing another character.
Oh.
And then when they come back, said, oh, well, why didn't you guys use this? Oh, my God. And we all just sit around slapping foreheads. But by this time, it's too late. It's all over. Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. I was shout out to Mark or Tiny as a DM.
Yeah.
He was running a session for me, and I had to be gone for work for a couple weeks. And I came back and I was like, "Hey, how did the druid run with my druid?" And she had always been running with Circle of the Moon, and I was doing the new Spores one. And I came back and I was like, going, "Why did you eat up all of my my wild shapes?" And she was like, going, "Because that's what you do." And I go, "Not with spores."
Oh.
And it was just interesting. Because, shortly after, I had, no health left, and I was just dead.
Have either of you had an experience where somebody couldn't make a session 100%, but they could, call in or something?
Yes.
How did that work out?
Very similar. I just said, hey, run my character for the beginning part. I'll probably be coming in a little bit late.
Yeah.
I trust you. Please don't let me die. So I put that on the players where it's kind of like, okay, how do you want to handle this as the DM? I go, do you want to be having somebody else run it, or do you want me just to have you on the back burner and have you burst out when you show up? Because that in terms of having one more thing on my plate on how to manage when I have no idea when you're arriving, would you rather have you be in there the whole time and have somebody else do that? You make that decision. I don't need that decision on my plate. Rather than having you manage, again, this other monkey wrench when you have no idea when or if they'll show.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of look at that as be nice to your DMs, please, as players. Know your situation, communicate.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Eric, do you think it's easier to take a character out of a pre-written campaign, or do you think it's easier to take one out of something you're homebrewing?
In terms of
having characters go missing from a game that has a set plot structure versus one that you're making up on the fly, I would think it would be easier to, like, if you're running Storm King's Thunder and you've got scripted combats and scripted NPCs versus something that Chris is doing where he could, take somebody out with a trap or something. He doesn't have a script he's following, right? He's making it up as he goes.
Yeah. That's a good... Yeah, we'll have to talk to Chris about that. He, depending on how... He does... I mean, he's planned ahead. So, I mean, he's got scripted... That's a good question.
Corey?
I mean, things are scripted technically, but I'm always willing to work on the fly, I guess, if that makes sense. In terms of, like... And the thing is, on Roll20, I have to have things prepped. So that's
right.
That's actually the bigger difference for me versus is it pre-written or is it homebrew? It's, well, regardless, I'm prepping things via Roll20, so I have to have those tokens and those things in play regardless. And then I can choose to use, I can add things or take away things during moments as I need them. But, we'd have to talk to Chris about that. I'm not sure and I don't have a whole lot of experience running 100% homebrew. The last time I did that was when we ran our Shadowrun campaigns, which was before we did D&D, where I actually wrote most of those adventures. And that's something we're going to talk about probably next week when I stream what the hell I'm going to do for my next campaign. Is I've got some ideas, but I'm not sure.
How would you answer that own question, Corey?
Sorry?
How would you answer that own question?
Well, I don't tend to homebrew anything. I tend to run large campaigns where I put a lot of effort in early on. Like the one I'm making right now for Roll20, I'm pretty sure I spent 300 hours plus putting all the maps and tokens and everything together. And then I have a hard time prepping before a session because of the way the campaign works. There are 40 plus levels they can get to. Whoa. And multiple ways to get to each one. And so I never know at the start of the session where they're going to end up. So, for example, last weekend, they were on level 4B, and level 4B has exits to level 3, level 5, and level 9. And so I've done all the prep I can by reading the module multiple times. I've set up all the maps with the tokens on them ahead of time. And then I just have to go with the flow. If they want to go back to town for half the day session, I'll wing it. And if they go to a floor that they're overpowered, I have to hope that they're going to run away. And so I find it very hard. I couldn't stream it. There's no way.
Yeah.
There's too much of me flipping through maps and flipping through books it'd be a lot of waste of time.
Module, so I know what I need to avoid.
Oh, it's a fantastic module. It's called Rapid Ethic, It's been around for
Is it
at
0.5
least
or 4U1?
3.5, but it's been converted from 3.5 to Pathfinder, and now they've converted it to 5th edition. And
Nice.
I love it, but like I said, it's a huge dungeon crawl, and they can go anywhere.
That can be very intimidating. And like I said, for Roll20 purposes, like I need to have that stuff ready.
Sorry, if I wasn't playing with the same group for as long as I have, I don't think I could run it for a group of new players.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap up our discussion on absent players. Jordan, what are your final tips, advice for what to do when faced with an absent player or players?
I think the problem is best remedied with communication beforehand, knowing whether or not what your guidelines or rules are at your table for absent players. That way you can manage that as best as you can. But in the end, if it is a non-expected situation, letting them make the choice of whether having someone else run them or if they would prefer that you just pull them out for whatever that period of time is, great. If it is an expected one, communicating with your party to see if they'd rather run a one-shot or if, again, they have a preferred method. I'd say communication is your best bet on figuring out exactly how to deal with that obstacle when it comes up.
Very nice. Corey, final thoughts on absent players and how to handle them?
Well, I'm thinking Roll20 is helping a lot with absent players, because I remember when we used to play with sheets of paper, and if somebody was going to skip and they'd taken their character sheet home, you're out of luck.
That's true.
Whereas now I can give one guy control of 5 characters. Not that I want to do it, but I can. We didn't really talk about excuses for missing D&D. I'm pretty ruthless with my guys. Like, I make a commitment and I drive 2 hours. 1 hour there, 1 hour back. So I want them to show up. And when they don't, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's lots of good excuses, and then in my group there can be some lousy ones too.
It's. I wanted to avoid that discussion just because missing D. I mean, like, let's be honest, missing D&D sucks. It's a group thing, so we're all trying to do it together, and that's what makes it fun. But it's life, and life can happen, and sometimes maybe you've got a bad excuse, but maybe you're just not feeling it like emotionally, and if you did show up, that maybe would be bad too in a way. So like sometimes, even what you think is a bad excuse could be a decent excuse. So it's not something I wanted to go into. I wanted to know like how to handle the situation, not necessarily like how to punish your players. That's not something I wanted to.
No, I'm not. I'm not serious about that. I'm 44 years old. I set out my time to do this. I don't charge my players to play games like some people do on Roll20 or whatever. I want to do it for fun.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want to show up at my buddy's house after driving for an hour and find nobody there either. So
right. Sure. It's just a point of respect, and so that's kind of the reason why I focus so much on communication. Because if you can do that, and you can have those rules of, I'm just looking for communication as a DM. Because I'm prepping, I'm taking my time, I'm not charging you, we're friends, we're all friends, talk to me, let me know what's going on. We can all be adults, but we can all have fun. So
that dynamic can change on what your group is, though. Like, obviously, some of us that have groups with dear friends, like the communication is a lot easier at that point.
Absolutely.
And it's not saying that sometimes you don't have hurt feelings or things come up that make you mad about it, but that's different than somebody you don't know. And then it's more of an unknown factor if, like, gosh, are they going to show up this time? Or are they just not communicating very well? Or then it's a question mark, and that's just real bad, too.
That's more of a rule of how do you deal with...
It's like etiquette for...
bad players, and that's a different topic.
It is a different topic, and that's something that we can talk about. It's something I don't, thankfully, have a lot of experience with, but it is probably worth talking about, because I'd love to hear what other people's experience is, and... Goodness knows we all, look at those horror stories on Reddit just for the funsies of how bad it can get with a lot of groups, but thankfully don't have to experience that.
Nope.
So yeah, my closing thoughts. Obviously, it sucks to miss players, but it is a reality of the situation. I think ideally, the players are respectful of the DM's time and can give them a heads up as much as possible, and the DM would be able to work around that. Best case scenario, you can even work that into the story and make the story even better. Not necessarily, probably not going to be as good as if the player was there, but maybe you can use all right, that person got captured, or now what was an NPC's role is now a PC's role because you were never going to capture a PC like this, but now since they're not there, well, all bets are off, you're going to get captured. That takes you out of the session, but then puts you in an interesting situation for next session. That's a very rare thing. You have to be very careful about doing that because you always want to be able to start the session that they can play with them having their agency back again. But it can lead to some cool scenarios and interesting storytelling. I think for the most part, you're probably looking at, especially if you're playing on Roll20 or something where you've got those character sheets available, then having somebody else run that sheet, at least for, combat purposes, and hopefully they got, the basics out of the way. But, on the other hand, don't feel bad about just temporarily taking that player character out if that's the better way to run it. And ultimately, your group. Is it really going to slow and drag things at the table to run this other character sheet, or is it going to be better to take that player character out of that session? So whatever method you have to do, go with it, and hopefully everybody's respectful of each other's time, and you can get enough of a heads up to kind of work around that. All right, thank you to Corey and Jordan for joining me for this month's DM Roundtable. I am Eric. Hope to see you all again for the next month's DM Roundtable discussion.
Have a good night.
Yeah. Good night, guys.
Thanks.